They didn't know it yet, but they were marching toward one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. A journey that began with youth, adventure, and the cold Siberian wind would end in inexplicable terror and death. It was January 1959, the Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union, the harsh and frozen spine of Russia. 10 hikers, students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk were preparing for what should have been a challenging but achievable trek. They were experienced. Most had braved expeditions like this before. They were young, fit, smart, hopeful. They were on their way to achieve a Grade 3 certification in hiking, the highest qualification at the time, needing to cover at least 300 kilometers in difficult terrain. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student known for his leadership and composure. The team included 7 men and 2 women, each one handpicked by Dyatlov for their skill and reliability. Yuri Doroshenko, Lyudmila Dubinina, Zina Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov, Yuri Krivonishenko, and Yuri Yudin, the 10th member who would unknowingly be the only one to survive. Yudin suffered from chronic health issues. As the group moved deeper into the mountains, he began experiencing knee pain and heart discomfort. Just days into the expedition, he made the difficult choice to turn back. He hugged his friends goodbye, some smiling, some teasing, none aware it would be their last embrace. He watched as they disappeared into the white haze of snow and wind, and that was the last time anyone saw them alive. The group forged onward into the wild, logging their journey meticulously in diaries and photographs. They joked, sang songs, posed in the snow, and documented everything. Their spirits were high despite the bitter cold that dropped well below zero. On February 1st, they veered off course, likely due to worsening weather. Instead of continuing toward their planned destination, they found themselves on the slope of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl. Rather than descend to the forested valley for better shelter, the group chose to set up camp on the exposed slope, perhaps to train for high-altitude emergencies or to avoid losing the ground they'd already covered. They pitched their large canvas tent. Inside, they prepared for sleep, wrapped in thick layers and sleeping bags, unknowingly entering their final night. When the group failed to send a telegram upon reaching their destination on February 12th, no one panicked. Delays in such conditions were expected, but days turned into weeks. Families began to worry. The university organized a search party. Eventually, military and rescue teams were dispatched. Helicopters scoured the mountain range, and then, on February 26th, searchers found the tent. It was half collapsed, half buried in snow. But what stunned rescuers wasn't just the tent's condition. It was how it had been abandoned, slashed open from the inside. Clothing, gear, and shoes were still inside. As if whatever forced them to leave didn't give them time to unzip the flap and step out. No, they cut their way out in a panic. Footprints, barefoot, socked, or in a single shoe, led away from the tent into the forest. For over 500 meters, the trail showed no signs of a struggle, as if the group had simply walked calmly or in a trance into the trees. 2 bodies were discovered under a cedar tree, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko. Barefoot, clad in only their underwear, curled around the remains of a fire. Their hands were burned, as if they'd tried desperately to stay alive. The branches above them were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had climbed it, maybe to look for the tent, or maybe to escape. Something. 3 more bodies were found between the tree and the tent. Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. All appeared to have died trying to return, All wore little clothing, some of it torn from the dead near the fire. Slobodin had a fractured skull, but nothing immediately fatal. The last 4 hikers were missing. At that point, no one could make sense of it. Why would seasoned hikers flee their tent in sub-zero temperatures, inadequately dressed, leaving behind all supplies? What did they see or hear that caused such primal terror? The official theories began: avalanche, hypothermia, disorientation, but nothing fit quite right. Then, in May, the final 4 were found in a ravine 75 meters deeper into the woods, beneath 4 meters of snow. That's when the mystery turned truly grotesque. They were found in a hollow of the forest, beneath layers of snow that had buried them for months. The last 4 hikers, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov, were discovered on May 5, 1959. What the searchers uncovered in that shadowed ravine would forever fracture any simple explanation of what happened on Dyatlov Pass. Their bodies were dressed more fully than the others, some even wearing bits of clothing taken from their fallen comrades. Dubinina had wrapped her feet in a torn jacket. Zolotaryov had a camera around his neck. But it wasn't the clothing that set these bodies apart. It was the injuries. Thibault-Brignol's skull had been fractured with such force, investigators compared it to a car crash. Dubinina's chest was crushed inward, her ribs broken in multiple places. Her tongue was missing, her eyes were gone. So were parts of her lips and facial tissue. Zolotaryov also had massive chest injuries. Yet here's what stunned the forensic team. There were no external wounds. There were no external wounds to match the severity of their internal trauma. No bruising, no torn skin. It was as if something had compressed their bodies with tremendous pressure, then vanished. Despite the grotesque condition of the remains, there were no signs of struggle. No evidence of violence between the hikers, no animal tracks. No footprints near the ravine, save their own. The investigators were baffled. Their first assumption had been a natural disaster, perhaps an avalanche, but the slope where the tent had been pitched was shallow. The tent was still partially standing, and if an avalanche had struck, why had the hikers survived long enough to make it hundreds of meters away, start a fire, and redistribute clothing? Next came the theory of paradoxical undressing, a behavior observed in hypothermia victims. Paradoxical undressing might explain the lack of clothes, but it didn't explain the crushing injuries, or why the tent was slashed from the inside. Then they looked at infrasound, low-frequency sound waves caused by wind patterns in mountain passes like the Karman Vortex Street. Some scientists theorized these sounds could trigger panic or disorientation, sending the hikers into a confused flight response. But again, it didn't match the violence found in the ravine. As the Soviet investigation continued, details began to leak, some bizarre, some alarming. One rescue worker claimed that the hikers' skin had turned a strange orange hue. Another said their hair appeared bleached. Radiation tests on some of their clothing revealed elevated levels of contamination, particularly on Dubinina and Zolotaryov's garments. This prompted speculation that they had come into contact with radioactive materials. But where and why? Despite the confusing autopsy results and mounting public interest, the Soviet government abruptly closed the case in May 1959. The official cause? A compelling natural force. It was a statement so vague, so unsatisfying, it only deepened the mystery. And without any living witnesses, theories began to bloom in the cracks left behind. Some pointed to military activity. The Ural mountains were known for secret weapons tests. Could the hikers have stumbled into a restricted area? Witnesses later came forward claiming they'd seen strange orange lights in the sky around the time of the incident, possibly missile tests or aerial flares. Some believe the force that crushed the hikers' bodies could have come from shock waves. Others leaned toward the paranormal. The local Mansi tribes had always considered Kholat Syakhl cursed, a place of death. Rumors of yetis or mountain spirits took hold. The brutality of the injuries, the missing tongue and eyes, it felt more like myth than accident. And then, of course, there were the UFO theories. Some researchers claimed the pattern of injuries and radiation hinted at an extraterrestrial encounter. Others thought the group may have been victims of a psychological experiment, exposed to a chemical agent or hallucinogen. Even decades later, when modern expeditions returned to the site, no single theory could account for all the bizarre details. The slashed tent, the deliberate flight into the cold, the crushed bones without surface trauma, the missing tongue, the radiation, the military silence. But through all this, one truth remains. Whatever happened on that mountain, it wasn't simple. These weren't naive adventurers making foolish mistakes. They were intelligent, experienced hikers. Whatever came for them that night, whether natural, human, or something else entirely, it struck fear deep enough to make them run barefoot into 30-degree C temperatures. Over time, the area was renamed Dyatlov Pass in memory of their leader. The rust-colored rocks and swirling snow now draw tourists, researchers, conspiracy theorists. A memorial still stands near the place their tent once lay, a solemn tribute to 9 lives lost and one story never fully told. But the mystery didn't die in 1959. In fact, it was just beginning. In the years that followed, Dyatlov Pass became a vortex, drawing in truth seekers, skeptics, scientists, and storytellers. What had started as a local tragedy grew into a global enigma. For every answer offered, new questions emerged, and at the center of it all stood one man, the lone survivor, Yuri Yudin. Yudin had always felt the weight of fate on his shoulders. He'd turned back early due to illness, a seemingly small decision that ultimately saved his life. In interviews, he said he spent decades haunted by what might have happened to his friends, some of whom he'd known since childhood. He called the official explanation nonsense and insisted the truth had been buried by the government. In the decades after the incident, Yudin became a reluctant witness to history. He combed through documents, revisited the mountain, and held fast to one theory: that military involvement had played a key role. He was especially disturbed by the radiation reports and the secrecy surrounding the autopsy findings. "If I had a chance to ask God one question," he once said, "it would be, what really happened to my friends that night?" But even Yudin, the man closest to the tragedy, couldn't offer definitive proof, and so the world continued to speculate. Some theories gained traction simply because they filled the void of uncertainty. The military test theory remained one of the strongest. Researchers pointed to parachute mines, airdropped explosives that detonate above ground. These could create immense internal injuries without leaving external trauma, consistent with the ravine victims. The idea? The hikers accidentally entered a testing zone. Explosions startled them. They fled, and the Soviet authorities covered it up. Then there's the katabatic wind theory, a sudden, violent gust of air that can whip down mountain slopes with hurricane force. This rare weather phenomenon could have caused the tent to flap and collapse, prompting panic and evacuation. But this doesn't account for the bizarre injuries or the group's disciplined descent. Another hypothesis: snow slab avalanche. In 2021, researchers from Switzerland used computer models, originally developed for Disney's Frozen, to test snow behavior on sloped terrain. Their findings suggested a small, delayed slab of snow could have struck the tent, causing blunt trauma and forcing the group to escape. It's the most scientifically grounded explanation yet, but even it can't explain everything. Like the missing tongue, the radiation, the burned hands, the silence from authorities. And then there are the fringe theories. Some claim the hikers were targeted by the KGB, perhaps mistaken for spies or involved in a secret intelligence operation. Others say they encountered an escaped prisoner or a mentally unstable hermit in the woods. Still others point to UFO sightings in the region that same night, citing glowing orbs in the sky and electromagnetic interference. The story has become something more than a mystery. It's a mirror, reflecting whatever fear, curiosity, or truth we project onto it. For some, it's about a government that knew more than it told. For others, it's a cautionary tale about nature's indifference. And for many, it's a haunting example of how little we truly understand the wilderness or ourselves. What makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so compelling isn't just the evidence. It's the atmosphere, the remote mountain, the eerie stillness, the precise, deliberate way the hikers recorded their final days, right up until the terror began. Their photos are still available, smiling faces in the snow, playful jokes, diary entries full of laughter and plans. It all makes what came next feel so wrong. In the modern age, hikers continue to visit the pass, some in search of answers, some for thrill, others to pay respects. The landscape hasn't changed much. Wind still howls across the slopes, and the shadows of the cedars stretch long in the fading light. Sometimes tourists leave behind small memorials, candles, photographs, or letters, messages to the 9 who vanished into the cold. Despite renewed investigations, including a Russian reopening of the case in 2019, the conclusion remains frustratingly vague. The hikers died due to a natural avalanche. But for many, that answer feels like a curtain drawn too early, a resolution that resolves nothing, a story cut short. And perhaps that's the true power of the Dyatlov Pass incident. It reminds us that the world is still vast enough for secrets, that even in an age of satellites and science, there are places where logic falters, where answers don't come wrapped in neat official statements, where 9 people can walk into the snow and never come back the same. Maybe it was an avalanche, maybe it was a military accident, maybe it was something the mountains will never let us understand. But somewhere, deep in the frozen silence of Dyatlov Pass, the truth still sleeps.